And it's when I think we've experienced that grace that we're able to be who we are honestly. And I think that's part of the problem in the church, is that we haven't been honest. You know, we've pretended that we don't have our crap while everyone else does, you know? And so then things happen with evangelical leaders and things, and people are stunned. And I think it's not that they expect Christians to be perfect, but they do expect us to be honest. And the problem is that we haven't been honest. We haven't been able to commit, confess our own brokenness in the world. And I think that the world is so hungry for that grace. And as we form communities, I think we've got to form communities that are embodying that grace. I don't know if you've seen the study that the Barna Research Group did. It was released in a book called Unchristian. How many of you have seen this? The Barna Research Group, sort of the Gallup of Christianity, they went through the U.S. and they asked people in every state, what are your perceptions of Christians? And what they found should break all of our hearts. The number one perception of Christians by non-Christians in the U.S., young non-Christians, the number one answer was anti-gay, anti-homosexual. Number two, Christians are judgmental. And number three, Christians are hypocrites. I'll stop there because it doesn't get a lot better. That was a few years ago, and I think there's been a radical shift that's still happening. But that I hope that a generation from now, that the first three things people think of is not anti-gay, judgmental, and hypocritical, but maybe it's grace. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's inclusion. That it's love. And so as we think of that, I think one of the things that's so cool about living in Pennsylvania is we got the Amish, and I think that the Amish and the Mennonites have a ton to teach us and to correct the evangelical church in much of our shallow formation and discipleship. I mean, I'm not trying to convince all of us to be Amish. We might have different dialogues and about gender dynamics, I don't know, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, like the Amish have some serious stuff to teach us about the depth of forming communities that are known by grace. You remember a few years ago after the terrible school shooting, right? What happened? I mean, books have been written about it, Amish grace and other stories. That what they did was, after this deranged man killed a bunch of their kids and then killed himself, the Amish community came together and they went to visit the family of the shooter. And they said, you must be really upset. Is there anything that we can do for you? And then the people began to pour out money to the Amish family. So they took the money and they created scholarships for the children of the shooter. And then as the funerals rolled around, they went to the funeral of their own kids, of course, but then they went to the funeral of the shooter to be with his family. And it caught the whole world's attention. I was speaking when that happened in Australia. Australia, very post-Christian, like not really a religious country, not a lot of good headlines about Christians in the news. And yet what made the front page of the papers in Australia when it happened was Amazing Grace. And it said, why would they do what they did? And they did what they did because they were transformed by the love and the life and the grace of Jesus. And in our little book, Jesus for President, we sort of asked the question of what would it look like if we had done that? We got a section called Amish for Homeland Security with a picture of the Amish looking really tough. And you think, what if that logic of grace and the cross were to infect our country and our world? What would it look like? And I can remember after September 11th, I was talking to one of the kids in our neighborhood who had seen a lot of violence. And he was like 11 years old at the time, a young kid named Stephen. And I said, Stephen, what do you think about this, man? What should we do? It's like September 12th. And he said, well, those people did something really, really evil and wrong. And I said, yeah, someone did. And he said, but I always say, remember, he's 11. But I always say, 2 wrongs don't make a right. He said, it doesn't make sense for us to hurt them back because we're all one big family. And then he looked up really excited and he goes, Shane, that means you and me are brothers, man. Which was cool because we got different colored skin, you know. But like that vision, I think, of that there's got to be another way. You know, it was in this 11-year-old kid. It was in Dr. King. It was in Gandhi. It was in so many of the people that are voices here, that are voices of grace. And I began to hear after September 11th stories of families that lost their loved ones in September 11th that have become known as Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. And these were people who lost their immediate family, daughters, sons, husbands, wives, mothers, children, and they came together originally to grieve. And then as they saw the war progressing, their prayer and campaign became, our grief is not a cry for war. And they began to go to Iraq and Afghanistan to meet families and to try to build bridges for reconciliation with that grace. And it was in their footsteps and so many others that, as some of you know, I got to go over in 2003 with the Christian Peacemaker teams. And they got a booth right over here. I hope you'll visit. But I had heard of the Christian Peacemaker team, CPT, and I got to go over with them. And I experienced so many things when I was there in March of 2003. So many things that didn't look like grace. And if you've read the things I've written or heard me talk about it, I mean, probably one of the most powerful places I went was called the Amaria Shelter. And it was a place that was filled with women and children. They didn't even allow men in the shelter because they wanted to make sure the kids were safe. Women and children only, hundreds of them, packed out a shelter. And 2 smart bombs fell on the roof of it. And they incinerated everyone inside. And as I went, you could still see the fingernail marks on the walls as they tried to climb out. So those things are inside me as I remember them. But I also remember the sense of hope and joy and grace that we felt. I mean, one of the things that we did was, in the middle of the bombing, we had a 12-year-old girl that was turning 13. So we thought, it doesn't matter if it's a war. We got to have a birthday party. 13's big, you know. And so we like got a cake and we blow up balloons. We start batting them around. We're having this big birthday party. And we're all playing in the park. And the bombs start falling. Everything's shaking. And, you know, all the adults, we look at each other and we're like, okay, we better call it quit, you know. And so we start packing up. But then the kids look at us and they're like, no, we got to keep playing. And one of them hit me in the head with a balloon, you know. And it was not just this childish naivety, but this deep sense that we can play, and our laughter is louder than the bombs. Our joy is more powerful than the hatred. And it is that promise that I saw in them. You know, we asked that little 13-year-old, we said, what do you want for your birthday? Her name was Amal, which means hope. And she said, I would like peace. And then she thought for a minute as a 13-year-old girl. And she said, but if one night, when nobody was in my high school, if one of the bombs fell on it, that'd be cool too. You know, but when no one is there, you know, but it's that which we begin to see, that these are kids and families that are not much different than we are. You know, in fact, I think I kind of went with a certain image of what an Iraqi person is that was radically transformed. You know, I mean, I was invited almost every single night by Christians in Iraq to go to worship. I was in the middle of Lent, you know, the period leading up to Easter. And so we're going to worship services. And I mean, we're singing Amazing Grace in Arabic. I mean, all kinds of beautiful things. And I ended up telling one of the bishops, I said, sir, this is stunning to me. I had no idea that there's so many Christians in Iraq. He was very gentle with me, but he said, yes, son, this is where it all started. He said, that's the Tigris River and the Euphrates. Have you heard of them? Garden of Eden, down the street, brother. You know, and so my own eyes were once again transformed. And they were also transformed by probably one of the most powerful experiences of my life, which was as we were leaving Iraq. we had a terrible car accident. And there's this desert road that goes from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan. And as we're driving, we're driving along that road. I mean, it's surreal. The bombs are falling, cars are on fire, bridges are down. And we had a car accident in the middle of that landed our car on its side, flipped over and in a ditch. And all of us were injured, some more badly than others. Two of my friends had head injuries. They were injured very badly. And so we're pulling everybody out of the car. And as we dragged them to the side of the road, I mean, there's not a lot of traffic at this point, you know? And so we're waiting and waiting. And then the first car of Iraqi civilians stops. And they took us in. And they drove us to a little town called Rutba. And these doctors got together and they nursed us back to life. They literally saved two of my friends' lives. And they told us that just the week before, one of the bombs had hit the hospital and had landed on the children's ward. And they had to close it down. And yet they looked in our eyes and they said, but it doesn't matter to us that you're American. He said, we want you to know that we love you. It was so powerful that immediately I'm thinking, we got to thank them, you know. And I think very Western American, you know. I think, okay, money. Let's get all our money together. So I get all of our money that we all had collectively in this big pile of Iraqi dinar, and I go and I give it to the head doctor, and he looks at me just absolutely puzzled, and he says, no, we don't want your money. We want you to know that we love you. If you just tell people the story of Rutba and what we did for you, that's all we would ever want. And so we have a community that Jonathan, Leah, and others have started here in North Carolina called Rutba House, named after the hospitality of that town. And then what's really exciting is this year, we've always dreamed of going back. And this past year, we got to go back to Rutba, and so this was not easy, you know. I mean, like, to get a visa into Iraq is not an easy task right now. So we jumped through all the hoops, and we end up going to the State Department. And we decide that we're going to go back, and we get over there, and then we ended up meeting with the ambassador, and he gives us a VIP visa in. We drive down that road again, and we get to the border. Probably one of the most fortified borders in the world, you know, that same little border into Iraq. And the U.S. troops stop us, and they're like, you can't come in. We're like, we got VIP visas, we're ready to go. And they said, no, there's a little war going on. No civilians cross over here. And then one of the officers said, no one crosses over this border without a gun. And we said, that's the problem, isn't it? And we said that we don't feel like the guns are making this situation any better. And we said, we've got friends on the other side. We got friends on the other side of this border who are waiting on us. And after like 3 hours, we're stubborn. We're like, we'll just camp out here until you let us over. And finally they let us over. And we're welcome. It's the most beautiful thing. We're driven back into Rutba, and we're welcome. The mayor's there. All of those doctors that had nursed us back to life were there, and the sheikh and the imams and all the like principals of the schools. They're all there, and they welcome us in. And I mean, like I just got tears rolling down my face. And they said to us this. Listen, they said, no one's been to visit us. No one's been to visit us without a gun in 7 years. You're the first international visitors that we've had. And they said, we want you to know that when we saw you 7 years ago, we saw you as our brothers and sisters, but we weren't sure that you saw us that way. And when we heard that you were coming back, they said, our first thought was you must have forgotten something, like your computer or your camera. And they said, but then when we heard that you were coming back to say thank you, it moved us. And they said, that's why you see our whole town gathered. One of the doctors said, this is why I'm a doctor. And then they took us to the schools, and they said, we want you to share, and you can share about your faith. And so we shared, and we shared in this Iraqi school, and the kids are listening, and they're weeping, and they're telling stories about seeing their parents killed, and they come up afterwards as we shared. And then one of the kids is just talking a mile a minute, and we said, what is he saying? And the principal said, He's saying, I've never heard this kind of Christianity before. And what hit me at that moment was that what is at stake in the world right now is not just the reputation of America, but the integrity of the gospel and the grace that is at the heart of the gospel. When folks see images on Al Jazeera of folks burning the Quran, and maybe that's all they see, and we see images of Muslims, that are doing extreme things, I think that it raises all sorts of questions. And Dr. King so brilliantly said 40 years ago that the question isn't whether or not we're going to be extremists. These are extreme times. So the question is not whether or not we'll be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hatred or for love? And I think the world's seen enough extremists for hatred. That burn Qurans, that blow up abortion clinics, that hold signs that say God hates fags. That's sick Christianity, if it's even Christianity at all. But I think the world is longing and poised to hear the message of grace again. And please, I hear some of the conversations and I feel really old school, traditional evangelical. I want people to know the love and the grace of Jesus. And I think one of the biggest obstacles to that has been Christians who have so much to say with our mouths and so little to show of God's love with our lives and our communities. So I want us to do something. I'm going to open it up. I've done my best to try to leave some time to interact a little bit, but I want us to be still for a minute. And when we were over in Iraq, we had this vision that what we need most right now is real friendships and relationships with real people. And so, what transformed me, the stories I tell are human stories with people with names, And so what we did was we started dreaming together. Brian McLaren and I were over there. Logan, who's teaching here, we were in Iraq and Palestine, Israel, and we're talking and we're dreaming together. And we said, let's create a network of friends without borders. Folks that are building relationships across the conflicts in our world. And let's have, so we started dreaming about that. And then we heard about these kids in Afghanistan who had the same vision and were using the exact same language of friends without borders. And what they did was they said, they started wearing blue scarves to show that the same blue sky it connects all of us around the world. And so we started wearing these blue scarves. So we said, we're going to start. We like that. You already got one on. And so you're going to see some of my friends, my community mates that are going to give out blue scarves here if you don't have one. And we're going to do something in just a second. But as those are given out, let's dream about this vision of creating friendships that bust through the walls so that we might see the kingdom of God come down on earth in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in North Carolina, in Philadelphia. And as they're giving those out, I'm going to put a couple of things that I carry with me on this chair. These are symbols of the violence. This is a shell of a bullet that was on our block after a shooting. Right now in Philadelphia, we've got almost one homicide a day. And I picked this up after a shooting on our block. Been carrying it around. It's a little hard to get through airport security, but I managed. And then I have a piece of one of those bombs that fell in Iraq in the public market and killed a lot of people in that market. And I went there right afterwards. As we were walking around looking at the debris and the blood, we picked this up. So I have it there. And then I also, one of the things that I've learned from Logan, who was in a session today, is the only people that are suffering from this myth of violence, of redemptive violence, are not just the folks in Iraq and Afghanistan, but they are, many of them, U.S. soldiers, where the suicide rate has often been higher than the combat death rate, where Christians sometimes are joining the military, as Logan says, because there's an economic draft in America, where kids don't know how else they're going to go to college, so they join the military. And as I've told some of these stories, kids have come up, one of them at Liberty University in Virginia. And he said, I was on the ship that fired the missiles into Baghdad as you were there. And I've been carrying that for a long time. And we prayed together that he would be healed and that Iraq would be healed from this terror of violence. So I've got the dog tags that those soldiers have given me. So let's look at those and be still. And if you've got a blue scarf, I want you to hold on to it. And we're going to do something in a minute. But let's have a moment of silence first. Now what I want you to do, in part just because we have a really great group of people together, is I want you to hold the scarves up. There may not be one for everybody, but I want you to make as close as we can to a blue sky. Because what we're going to do is we're going to send a little video and some pictures to the kids in Afghanistan who had this vision. So hold them up with the folks around you if you can. The kids that had this vision call themselves the Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers. And it's a vision of a world of friends without borders. A world where we recognize that there's one blue sky that connects us all. So as they see us from Afghanistan here in North Carolina, we want them to know that we're cheering them on as they try to build that world of peace. Amen? Amen. Thanks for doing that. So, I tried to leave a little bit of time. We're a big group, but I'm going to ask you, I don't think we just learn through monologue, but through dialogue. So, in Philly, you're not allowed to give a sermon unless you have talk-back time in our congregation. So, please, if you need to leave, you can, but I'll cut us off by the end of our 10 minutes here. But if you have a thought or a question, I want to invite you to share that. I'm going to be quick because I heard God tell me I got to be quiet. But Sister was asking about community. And I'm going to say this, right after this talk, we're going to slide right on over to Conspire. So if you want to keep the conversation going, we'll go right over there. But I think you, Sister, were asking about this idea of community. And I think it's so important and so messy, but it's at the heart of the gospel, is that we're not alone. When the first humans made, it's not real good until they're helping each other, and Jesus has promised where 2 or 3 of us are together, Jesus will be with us. So I think communities, it's a mess though. I think we need structures. And one thing I would challenge for us in this gathering is that it needs discipline and it needs structure. And so if we're not careful, we just create these sloppy communities of liberalism and say where everybody's welcome, and we're going to end up with a mess if we're not careful, because disciple is about discipline. It's about, as Dorothy Day, the anarchist, said, we've got to be some of the most orderly people in the world, because we're trying to build an environment where it's easier to be good, and it doesn't just happen. So we got to have holy habits. We got to have new rhythms. And we'll talk more about that right over at Conspire. But thank you. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.